think, when I talk about the Korean sort of, social trends, I think there may be things that tend to be, not so rosy or not sort of complementary to, Korean society. But if there is one issue or one thing that every Korean, including myself, can stand very proud of its achievement, it's economic development. Because there are only a few countries in the world that have achieved what Korea has achieved in such a short span of time. Okay? We're talking about making a difference from the 1960s to, well, now, right? It's an evolving, it's a sort of a continuing success story, okay? So from the 1950s or 60s on to this day, if you're to name countries that have economically transformed themselves, what countries come to your mind? Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, right? And it's more recent, talking about from the 60s.
Hong Kong?
Japan was industrialized as far back as the late 1800s. They sort of re-industrialized after the war, after the Second World War. I'm missing the fourth one.
Hong Kong?
Yes, Hong Kong. So these four countries were called, Asian tigers, newly industrializing economies or newly industrialized economies, right? So only four countries have achieved these. But I think Hong Kong, you can't really call it a country. Singapore, the same thing. So the only two countries that have really achieved sort of economic success are two, Taiwan and Korea. And of the two, and I'm not bragging, Korea was much more successful as a sort of a country. I think I'm not talking about sort of how people in Taiwan are not sort of enjoying the same level of economic success. I'm talking about in terms of the gross or the total sort of economic output. Korea is sort of considerably bigger. Okay, so with that in mind, I will show you some visual images. This is Seoul right after the war. Okay. In 1953. From the looks of it, downtown Seoul, wouldn't you say? I mean, if any part of Seoul, if it had like a 2-story or 3-story high building, it had to be central Seoul. Okay. This is Seoul again. And this is Namdaemun Market in the 1950s. You've all been to Namdaemun? Look what it looks like now. There's the Namdaemun. I really need a cup of coffee this morning. And this is Cheonggyecheon. You've been to Cheonggyecheon? It's now a very attractive tourist site. This is what it looks like. This is Cheonggyecheon. This is Jongno Street in 1953. This is what it looks like now. And this is Myeongdong in the 1950s. It's Myeongdong today. And other photos which amply display how Korea has come a long way, right? I mean, I don't I hope nobody sort of looks at, I mean, in showing the level of success in any country, I think one sort of, you know, in some way superficial way of showing how a country has achieved economic success is showing its architecture, okay? Sort of, at least in the Korean context or Asian context, I would say. All right, so with those pictures in mind, now I have this lecture outline: the Korean economy, brief overview, international factors for growth, internal social and political factors, the role of culture and timing. Okay, now here are some data that really show, again, how much we have achieved as a nation. Korea has set a miracle in the history of world economics. Korea's GDP was $1.3 billion in 1953, but it grew to over $1.3 trillion in 2013. And how many times did Korea's GDP grow? 1,000 times. Okay? In a span of, what, 60 years, Korea's total GDP jumped 1,000 times. So you can see how it was almost zero, I mean, in comparison, right? But it grew by leaps and bounds. Exports increased 13,000 times during the last half century. GDP per capita in 2014 reached over $28,000. Also, between 1963 and 2013, gross national income per capita jumped 380 times, from a $67 in 1953. Okay, there's a mistake there, right? That should be 1953. Korea's per capita GNI reached a $20,000 mark for the first time in 2007. So it's not really updated, but you get the figure, right? I mean, you get the idea. That so when you see many figures on Korea, economic data, you see a steep rise, like in the case here. Just for fun, which countries have the world's highest per capita GNIs? Just for fun. Which country comes to your mind first? Yes? Surprisingly, no. It's in the top 5, but not number 1. Any other country that comes to your mind? Yeah. It's in the top 5. Okay, the number 1 is Monaco. My God, just living in Monaco gets you $180,000 a year. Don't you want to move to Monaco? And gamble all the time? Number 2 is Liechtenstein. You're like an artist by the name, same, almost the same, I guess. 3rd is Bermuda. 4th, Norway. 5th, Switzerland. Qatar, Luxembourg, USA, 11th ranked, and Korea, Japan, 19th, and Korea, 33rd. Okay, and I think I've told you before how when you look at these, especially Korea, because we're expected to reach the 30,000 mark by the end of this year. Okay? And to get a true sense, or sort of to get an understanding how misleading this can be, again, this is per capita gross national income, right? So in the family of 4, that means by the end of this year, every household with 4 members, let's say, should make $120,000 a year. But look around, how many of us are making that much money? I mean, as a family unit. Again, same goes for the United States. How many families in the United States, in a family of 4, make over $200,000? Okay? So what this tells us is that there is a great inequality, okay? Because some of us, or few of us, are making disproportionate amount of money, okay? While others are not doing as well, okay? Korea is also a major exporter in the world today. Korea now is the world's 5th largest exporter. I mean, you know, we know how Korea is like the 13th largest economy, but when it comes to exports, it's even doing better, okay? It's 5th largest exporting country with over, I think that's, what? There's some million, 10 million, 100 million, billion, 10 billion, $628 billion in exports, okay? And that's from 2014. And the 2014 figure represents a 28,545-fold increase from the total exports of 22 million in 1948. So I think some of these figures is astounding, aren't they? And I think everyone would know this one, right? The number 1 exporting country, China, okay? And Korea's top conglomerates, including Samsung, LG, they account for around 50% of the nation's exports. So I think, in a way, this is not such a good thing, because you know how Korea is export-dependent country. I think, and if we depend so much on these top 10 conglomerates for the exports, then you would think that conglomerates account for, what, 1/3, 50% of the total workforce? The reality is not. Conglomerates account for like what, 10% of the total labor force, and yet they account for so much of Korea's economy. That's why, you know, having these big conglomerates with little competition is not good for the labor market. Okay? So that's why having a strong, small to mid-sized, you know, firms, them doing well in the economy is vital to the labor market. So maybe our love for things made by, you know, big conglomerates is not all that, you know, sort of glamorous. It's not all that, you know, we should really sort of love this situation, because the young people, you know, when you have these sort of dominant market forces with little competition, it does not create as many jobs as there should be. Okay, because again, competition is always good, but with, you know, Samsung, LG, Hyundai, we have very little competition. Okay, because we ourselves have this Jebol mindset. You know, I think I sort of came up with that idea. Jebol mindset. You know, sometimes we criticize Jebol, but at the same time, we're #1 consumers of, you know, things produced or made by, you know, Samsung, LG, right? Isn't that true? When you have a choice between a product made by Samsung and a product made by a mid-sized manufacturing firm, which one do you choose? Probably the former, right? So what you're doing at the same time is killing the potential rise of a company that produces as good a quality product as a big conglomerate. Okay, so you know, one of the major drivers of economic strength in the United States is this venture spirit and venture system. Okay, so if somebody comes up with a good idea, people make investments, and there is no big, you know, titanic conglomerate that kills the idea, like what happens in Korea. Okay? So the spirit of entrepreneurship is very much alive in the United States, for example, but in Korea, I think young people do not dare to start businesses because once you start something and it smells good, what happens next? Conglomerates step in and step all over you. That's reality. Okay? So I hope that sometime from now on, when you have a choice, you know, don't just automatically buy things produced by big conglomerates. Okay? Give small companies a chance. Okay? I'm not talking about, you know, buying a TV. I'm talking about small things. Okay? You start from there. Right? Okay, Korea transformed itself from a typical poor agricultural country into an exporter of cutting-edge goods. It's now top producers of cell phones and LED TVs, or should I say smart TVs. This is sort of slightly outdated. I don't have a date on this or year, but it is still true. Samsung is #1 producer of smart TVs. I think there is a sort of a neck-and-neck competition between Sony and LG, but you know, just 10 years ago, you know, nobody would have predicted that Korea-made TVs would take over the top spots. Okay, replacing, you know, Sony. I mean, Sony was like #1 for such a long time, right? But now, you know, it's Samsung and LG like almost 1 and 2, right? And I think their dominance in the smart TV market will, I think, continue for long. Although there's a serious challenge from China. Okay, so I think what worries many sort of Koreans is how you know, we make fancy products, but we don't really have loyal consumers like the Apple consumers. Okay, so when it comes to, for example, cell phone, that's the thing. Once you have this Chinese sort of, you know, producers coming up with similarly fancy stuff, can, you know, our products have competitive edge in any way? Okay? Because, you know, before the rise of the four tigers and before the rise of even China, the American and the Western producers felt threatened for a time, but they have changed their tactic of producing or focusing on brand name products. And they have succeeded. But when it comes to Korea, Taiwan, and other late sort of blooming sort of countries, can they have that? Can they go sort of with the same sort of way of making their products competitive? Can let's say Samsung and LG sort of, do they have time to establish their products as sort of real brand name products? That is a big question. Okay? The country also manufactured 4.5 million motor 4.5 missing million. Okay? Million motor vehicles in 2014, ranking as number 5 in the world. And the big question now is, which country is the #1 manufacturing country in the world as far as motor vehicles is concerned? Oh, you guys know this. I thought all along it would be the United States, but it's China is #1. Okay? It's a very little known fact, I think, because we don't see Chinese cars on the road. Okay? But if you go to China, chances are you'll see more Chinese-made cars than American or Korean, for that matter. Look at this. The total number of cars made in China is more than double that of the cars made in China. Okay? Number 3 is Japan, number 4 Germany, and number 5 is Korea. Okay? And Korea is also the second largest shipbuilder in the world with a global market share of 29% in 2012, China #1. Okay, Korea was #1 for a long time, but now #1 is China. And before Korea's rise as a major shipbuilder, #1 country was Japan. Okay? Do you have any questions up to this point? Or any comments to make? Korea is also one of the importers. I mean, that's not surprising, right? We export a lot, and at the same time, we import a lot. So, 7th largest importer. Okay? The largest importer in the world, the United States. Okay? The United States has a huge trade deficit, which is really the opposite of what's happening in China and in Korea, because we also have a trade surplus, and we've had that status for a long time. The opposite is true in the United States, but you know, U.S. is doing well economically, although it has suffered somewhat from the global financial crisis. One of the key reasons why, you know, U.S. could do so well is because, I mean, this is such a simple thing, but if you think about it, it's just so ridiculous in a way. Let's say, you know, USA owes $500 billion. It has to pay back that money by the end of this month. But it's, you know, it's in serious debt. And how does the country come up with the money to pay back? It just prints more money. That's why you can just spend and don't care, because it just printed so many, because it's the money that's being circulated. It's like the country producing gold whenever it needs more gold. Because, as you know, before the Bretton Woods and other currency sort of, you know, determining mechanism, gold was the, you know, common currency, right? That has been replaced by largely US dollars. Okay? So the crazy thing about the whole international monetary system is that the country you know, where this sort of the world currency is being used, could just print more money. Okay? Can we do that? No, but USA could do that. Okay, and this is a big question, and do you think this will be in the exam or not, for your final exam? You bet your money that it could easily be in the final exam. What are the factors that facilitated the remarkable economic development of Korea from the 1960s to the 1980s that set the stage for the country's status as one of the leading economies of the world today? And I'll give you a couple of minutes to write this down. And what would be your answers to this question? So what did Korea do right to achieve its economic success?
Investing in heavy industry.
To invest?
In heavy industry.
Okay, so it made heavy investments into heavy industry. It's one of the things it did. Okay, anyone else? Dictatorship. So why don't we say leadership that was focused on economic development? And you know why leadership matters? And I think I could just, for comparison, think of one country where it is so rich in terms of oil reserve, and it's still one of the poorest countries in the world. Which country am I talking about? Nigeria. It has like the world's 5th largest oil reserve, and it's selling tons of oil every year, you know, bringing in tens of billions of dollars. But it's a very poor country. Why? The country's leaders, from the, like, let's say the 1950s, there were so many military coups, and every time there was a new leader, did these leaders do anything to really, you know, construct the country in a very productive way? No. From what I know, every single leader of that country was a dictator who, you know, sort of personally took, okay, all the riches that were made through oil money, or through oil. Okay? So leadership, that's why leadership is so important. Okay? Yes? Very good. We were allowed by the United States to sort of implement a protectionist policy. You know what protectionist policy is? It is to ban imports from coming into the domestic market, to protect its domestic industries. Okay? So, do you think Samsung and LG and even Hyundai had a chance to develop whatever they have today if Korea's market was fully open, like it is in the world today? You know why I don't think that any country in Africa or in other parts of Asia have a chance to industrialize today? I don't think what Korea's success will ever be duplicated because of the WTO. Okay? No country, unless it is a country on an island without any ties to the rest of the world, can never implement a protectionist policy. So let's say you are living in Congo and you want to make a new toaster that you think is the best in the world. But you're competing with what? Hundreds, not hundreds, but dozens of toaster making companies in the world. And can you stay competitive? Because one thing that will go against you is the cost. Okay? How can you make a toaster in your own country for $20? Because that's what you could, because there are. I mean, at Walmart, there's no Walmart here, but sometimes when it's on sale, for $10 you could buy a toaster. Okay? In your country, that's what you're faced with as competition. Okay? But back in the 1960s, Samsung, LG, CJ, they had no competitions for close to 2 decades. Okay? LG was famous for making what in the 1960s? Soap and toothpaste. And Koreans had no access to Colgate, no Crest. That's why your grandparents have such terrible teeth. Just kidding. LG went by the name of Lucky Gold Star, Kumsam. Anyway, so that's why I sometimes jokingly say, shouldn't sort of Samsung pay back something to society? Because what it is today is really, really 100% owed to what the government did for the company. Okay? So, if I have a chance to talk with the son of Igani, make Everland, okay, freely available to all the children of Korea at least. Doesn't that make sense? Okay? But it's just making money and it's very expensive, Poor children cannot go there because it's so expensive. So why can't it have a nice gesture like that? Children of Korea under the age of 18 all enjoy our park for free. I hope that day comes one day. Anyway, we're going to talk more about this later. Anyone else? What accounts for Korea's economic success? Yes?
The development state model.
Development state model. You want to share with the rest of the class as to what that is more specifically?
Choosing industries that the country wants to focus on, things like the shipbuilding and steel building, and using things like import substitution, and developing the government telling the companies where it's going to develop and using good financial mechanisms to develop companies like Samsung and LG.
Very good. I think your classmate sitting next to you said something similar, investment into heavy industry. So what the Korean government did was to choose a path where the state play a very heavy-handed role in determining what industries to develop and what economic strategies to pursue. Okay, in all of this, the government, how capitalism, ideally speaking, is about market sort of leaving the market take its own course, right? But in the case of Korea, like in Japan and what's happening in China, the government plays a very, very strong hand in sort of pursuing particular economic policies. Okay, so that's definitely one of the key reasons for the economic success of Korea. What else? people's sacrifices. I think that's also a good factor because during the 1960s and 70s, although we did have some labor strikes and demonstrations, people largely sort of endured long hours of work under harsh working conditions because for the first time they felt that only by industrializing that we could finally sort of become a strong country. Because ever from time immemorial, was Korea ever a strong country? We were invaded, someone counted hundreds of times. I mean, I remember there was this one source that really specified a number of times that we were invaded. And it amounted to hundreds of times. Okay? And every time, we were not successful really, right? We were so kind and peace-loving people that we just let them in and, you know, please take our things. And, I'm making a joke here. But with this emphasis on economic growth as the panacea, as the sort of the medicine, right medicine to sort of rectify all the social ills, there was this idea that we need to industrialize. And for that, you know, let's endure a little bit of pain that comes along with working hard for little amount of money. And a lot of people believed in this idea, right? That we could finally work hard and our country industrializes and finally we become a strong country. And in this sort of nationalistic ideology sort of being utilized for industrialization, we also made use of these external enemies. Okay? And what external enemies are we talking about? When we talk about enemies, what countries come to your mind? Say it. No. Japan. And North Korea. So the idea was, you know how in the 1960s up to the early 1970s, North Korea was doing better than South Korea. Okay? So our government or the policymakers said, you know, we have to industrialize so that we get better than North Korea, so that we build a strong military to withstand, okay, or to prevent North Korea from attacking us again. Do you think that idea sold well or not? Very well. Another thing was, Japan was so ahead of us, and the policymakers were saying, hey, we have to catch up with Japan. You know, Japan was a country that was inferior to us. At least that's what we thought for a long time. Okay? Before Japan industrialized from the mid-1800s, we thought of Japan as a country inferior to us. Okay? Because we always were doing better in emulating Chinese civilization. Because our standard, our sort of benchmark for sort of advancement was doing things that what China did and trying to just emulate them, right? And we're always doing what's better than Japan, and we always thought that we were better than Japan, but with industrialization, Japan was, you know, doing better. And what's a better sort of stimulating comment than saying, look at Japan. You know, we gotta do something to catch up. And that's what really worked. Okay? So we're gonna talk about that also when I start talking about all the factors that account for the rise of the Korean economy. Okay? And we're gonna cover that on Thursday.